Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November of 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. It's time to share your stories now. The forgotten mourners, the surviving siblings, the story that is not told enough. Season 3 of the Surviving Siblings podcast is brought to you by sibsforever.org, a virtual platform for you, the surviving sibling, to commemorate and honor your sibling relationship. Visit sibsforever.org today to create your free profile and start building beautiful commemorative web pages that can include photo and video galleries featuring you and your sibling. Now, let's dive into the episode. Today, I have another incredible guest for you. She'll be sharing her story and the loss of her brother, Clint. Her name is Chelsey McHale. Chelsey, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to share my story about my brother and allowing this platform for others to share about their siblings that they've lost. It really is such a great outlet and a great way to express yourself when sharing your story. And as I'll probably talk later on, just the importance of sharing, therapy, group, but everyone has a different story. And I love that this is more honed in for siblings. And I love that I get the chance to share my story about Clint, not just his passing, but also just he and I and our relationship that we had together.
You are welcome, Chelsey, and I'm excited for everyone to hear, all of the surviving siblings here, to hear your story and Clint's story. So I'm going to hand it over to you so you can share a little bit about your relationship with Clint, your background, and then, of course, we can talk about his passing and your grief journey. So I'm handing it over to you.
So my brother Clint, he was 2 years older than me, so he was the big brother, and it was just he and I. And we actually were born and raised in Arizona, so we're natives, which that's kind of rare in Arizona to have that. So we're like unicorns in a way. And my brother and I, though, it was just he and I with my mom growing up. So she's a single parent. My dad was an addict. They were both from the East Coast, but he kind of was there on and off and wasn't much involved in our life until later on. And my mom, being a single mom and raising 2 kids, she worked 2 jobs. Clint and I were by ourselves quite a bit at a very young age. And looking back now, it's such a blessing to have that because we just did so many adventures together. We were quite the entrepreneurials. We had a patio cleaning business. We had a car washing business. We were 7 and 9 years old. And I remember we cleaned a patio and they gave us $20 and we thought we were rich. There was a golf course and we'd find, the golfers, their golf balls. We would steal them, 7, 9 years old, polish them up, and then we sold them back to the golfers on this little stand, almost like a little lemonade stand. And we got along best when we were up to no good, but we were always quick to point, the finger to the other person who, whenever we'd get in trouble. But how that benefited with us in a different way is we fought quite a bit, as siblings do. And my mom put us into counseling. We did not want to go to counseling together. So my brother came up with the idea where he said, hey, we don't want to do this anymore. Why don't we just go in there and pretend everything is fine and blame it on mom? And I said, okay. We just kind of tagged along.
Okay, I have to laugh there. That is so funny.
That's how it was. I just kind of tagged along. Whatever he said, I followed. And he would do photo shoots, schedule those for Father's Day or Mother's Day, and would tell me where to go or what to wear. And I just show up. But at the counseling session, it's so vivid in my mind. And I just can see us sitting there and the counselor asking, how is everything going? And Clint and I are laughing together. We're hugging and thanking her for all that she's done to help us. And then we shift it and we start talking about my mom in a negative way. And then when we leave, my brother and I are all leaving, hugging each other. And it's all just kind of the facade. We still have that sibling rivalry, but we didn't want to go to counseling anymore. So when we were leaving, the therapist actually called my mom back and said, I need to talk to you. And so we definitely got in trouble later. But my mom at the end of the day said, well, I can't be too mad because at least you guys got along in some capacity. And so we worked together with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was definitely a really good memory. And he was always a prankster too. Growing up, when he was 3 years old, my dad was kind of like winding up the hose after he was getting done, after he was gardening. And my brother put a fake snake where the hose was and just scared my dad. And at 3 years old, I don't know how, he just loved it. Yeah. He loved it so much. And so as we grew up, we did fight a lot, brothers and sisters, siblings, do. And my mom and him didn't have the best relationship. She had an abusive boyfriend, so our childhood was definitely a little rocky, and he did get the worst. He had to grow up definitely way too fast and really became independent after he became 18, quite a bit. Whereas I still needed, I was still depending on my mom, but he just moved forward in his life and just kept going. It was really inspiring. And I went to school at Northern Arizona University up north in Flagstaff here in Arizona. I was studying to be an English teacher. I wanted to teach 8th graders because they like a good challenge. And I thought that was the most challenging age. I know, at least for me, I wasn't.
You're very brave.
I wasn't a good.
Very brave. Very brave.
Yeah, I was like, how am I going to relate to these 8th graders, these 14-year-olds when I'm 23 years old? But I wanted the challenge. So I studied very hard in school and just could not wait to graduate. And my mom and my dad, they had divorced when we were really young. My brother and I had our relationship with our dad later on in life. They hadn't seen each other, though, in 20 years. And the first time that they were going to see each other was going to be at my college graduation. And that was the first time my brother and I would ever remember, they'd been in a room together, but we were too young to remember. So my brother couldn't wait. He was excited. He's like, let's make this as awkward as possible. Let's parent trap them. And I said, no, Clint, we don't want them back together. We're not going to parent trap them. And he just could not wait. He was so excited to just make it as awkward as possible. And that's what he always did. And so one night, a week before my graduation, I was studying for my final exam in my dorm. I had another roommate. I get a knock on my door, and it's our resident assistant who hands me a sticky note, just has a phone number on it, says there's emergency with your brother, and you have to call this number. And I was very confused. And to backtrack a little bit, just a couple of weeks prior, when I was down in Phoenix before going back up to study for my last final exam up north, Clint and I spent a good amount of time together. We went to the movies to see the movie Water for Elephants with Reese Witherspoon and Robert Pattinson. I had read the book. The book is so great, and I was excited to see the movie. None of my friends wanted to go with me, so I asked my brother, and Clint said, yeah, I guess. All right. And we went, but he wanted to make a stop at this Greek restaurant outside the theaters. And he ordered all this food that we brought into the theater. The entire theater smelled like onions. And the whole time I was like, we're going to get in trouble. He just didn't care. And after the movie, I said, did you like it? Like, I loved it. And he said it was okay. And we went up to this rooftop bar. We had a Blue Moon. That was his favorite drink, his favorite kind of beer. And we took a photo together, and he has this goofy face in it. Then the next day, we laid out the pool at his apartment complex. We took pictures of the clouds. It was just a really beautiful day. And I hugged him and got in the car, waved, said, love you, see you at my graduation. So leading up to that sticky note, as you've shared in here, the call, whereas with me, it was the knock.
Yeah.
And that morning, though, this is May 4th of 2011, that morning, he texted me that photo of us on that rooftop bar and him looking goofy in it. And I text back, LOL. And that was that morning. So a few hours later, that's when I got this knock on my door, the sticky note. I call the number thinking it's a prank, because how are we supposed to comprehend that? I just talked to him that morning. And I quickly learned it was not a prank. It was a hospital that I was calling down in Phoenix. They said that my brother was in a mountain climbing accident, that he had fallen, and that it's life-threatening and not good. I kept asking, but is he alive? But is he alive? And they just kept repeating the same thing. It's life-threatening, not good. You need to get down here. And I was also wondering why I was the one that got notified, which I later learned I was his emergency contact. I didn't even know that.
Oh, wow.
My dad was in Tucson. I'm in Flagstaff. So he and I were really close. But at that moment, physically, we were very far apart. So he called the hospital too, and they were giving the same information. But I had to call my mom and tell her, that she was the closest one to get to the hospital because they were all saying the same thing to us. And it was really hard because just a week prior, she was yelling at me to not invite my brother to my graduation. She said no, that he can't come. And I said, it's my graduation. And yes, he's coming. End of story. So it was very weird a week later to now tell her she has to go to the hospital because he was in an accident. So I waited 45 minutes staring at my phone, calling him. I kept calling him because, it had to have been a mistake. It couldn't have been my brother. It had to have been someone else. But I waited 45 minutes and finally my mom called me after she had gotten there and very calmly said, Clint died at 4:30 p.m. today. And that was not what I thought was going to be what was told to me. And that's when I really learned that true meaning of just, falling to your knees. And that's what happened. And just my knees buckled and I just fell. And you're in that fog and that daze and you can't comprehend that. Our brains aren't wired to comprehend something like that so significant and massive in our life to happen all at once. So I was just in a state of shock. And then after I hung up with my mom because my roommate took the phone from me because I was just shaking. Shortly after I said, wait, I have to call my dad. And when I made that phone call and having to tell my dad that his son died, I can still hear him, screaming when I made that call. And I never want to do anything like that again, a call like that.
Yeah, that's really tough. I was the person that called my dad as well. And so my heart goes out to you, Chelsey, because I was that person too. And it's indescribable. So when did it sink in with your dad? Was he in shock? What was his reaction? And how did you manage that?
My roommate, again, took the phone from me because he was just like crying and started throwing up. And so my roommate took the phone and she really helped me. And there was at that moment, my only thing was, I have to get home. I'm up north. I want to get home. So, and then it's 2.5 hour drive. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to do this? This whole time though, my roommate was already packing up my entire dorm. She had already called her dad, who was less than 2 hours, lived from Flagstaff. And before I knew it, he was there. Later, I had asked her, how did you know? Why did you packed up my whole dorm? You called your dad. We didn't even know if he'd passed away yet. And she said, I knew. And I said, but how? And she's like, by what they were telling you. And she said, I could tell that he was gone, but I knew you needed to hear it though. And I look back now and what a blessing though, because in that fog and state of grief, that's your first thought. What do I do next? What am I supposed to do? Because nobody teaches you, okay, then you do this. Even packing, what do I pack? What do I take? So that was really,
yeah. 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 You were very, I don't want to say lucky because we're not lucky to go through the situation, but I think you said it beautifully. Your roommate was a blessing totally. And, you've heard my story as most of you guys have as well. And, I think we have these people in our lives for a reason and it's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And she and I aren't even in touch today. And it's not a falling out or anything like that. We just lost touch. But I look back at that dark, very dark moment, and she's the brightest light that I see in it because she did what I needed that I didn't even know I needed. And then there was the planning of the funeral. That's where it got very complicated because I was not allowed to have any say in planning the funeral, and neither was my dad. It was just my mom and her sister. Everything, the photos of me in the house came down and only he was up where, just a week prior, she was screaming at me, telling me he can't come to my graduation. And then now he passes and now she loves him. And that was really hard. That was really hard to not be able to have a part in that while trying to also at 23 years old, figure out what am I supposed to do next? So his funeral ended up being the day of what would have been my college graduation, which was Friday the 13th.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. As I said that, I said the taping right now, it's Friday the 13th. But it was very...
Hello, yeah.
I know. And I still wore the white and yellow dress I was going to wear to my college graduation. I stood out among all those wearing black. It's a daze and a fog looking back at it all. But I was to live with my mom, while I started my career as teaching. And it's very hard to start. How do you start your career right after that? But I didn't know the day after his funeral, my mom made me leave and I didn't have anywhere to go. So I had to go to a friend's house and slept on his couch for months. And it was brutal. It was hard. And my dad, I think I shared, he was an addict. He was a great dad, but he had that addiction issue and he relapsed. And then my mom wasn't speaking to me. And I didn't want to be an enabler to my dad, but I also needed my dad. I needed someone. So it was very, very challenging as I felt that I was in the middle trying to make it work and for everyone, making sure everyone else was okay, but I wasn't really taking care of myself. But his death, I learned more in detail. He was with his friend and it was Camelback Mountain here in Phoenix. It overlooks the city. It's beautiful. You Google what are things to do in Arizona, Camelback's going to pop up. It actually pops up as a bucket list item. And it is a beautiful mountain. It's a mile.
It is so gorgeous. Yeah, it's gorgeous. I've been there. I've done retreats there when I worked in corporate America. We would book retreats overlooking. I did one big retreat. I was probably, 23, 24, probably the same age you were when you lost Clint. And it's gorgeous. So that's what he was hiking? That's where he was when he passed?
Yes, he was. Camelback Mountain was his go-to mountain. Growing up, we hiked Superstition Mountains. That's in Apache Junction in Arizona, which is more out in the desert. That's what I prefer when it comes to hiking, is being in the actual desert. But there are so many people that love smack, right in the city. And I get that because it is beautiful at the top. And he loves sunsets and he just loved going there. He meditated there. And then he just started rock climbing essentially, but he didn't train for it. He didn't have the right shoes. He didn't even have the safety equipment. And he was with a friend. They were almost to the top. And I don't know all of the vivid details other than what the news has shared because his friend refused to share the whole details with me. And early on, that bothered me so much. I was angry. I was really angry because I wanted to know what happened. And all I knew was what the news said. But looking back now, I'm glad that I don't know all the details, but all I know is he was almost to the top. He was slipping and he asked his friend, help me, I'm going to fall. And he goes to grab his hand and he drops it. And my brother falls 50 feet. And he didn't pass away though, right away. He was still alert. He was still alive. And the news helicopter just was hovering over them. And I found that out later because they aired it on the news, his accident. I had no idea. That was back in 2011. So, now it'd be even worse. But that's about how 75% of his friends found out that he had passed. They saw it on the news.
Wow.
And you can watch him. I've watched it. You watch him dying. And it's traumatizing to see.
So hang on a second, Chelsey. Yeah, absolutely. I can connect with you so deeply on this because we all know the story of my brother being brought into, basically the trauma unit and it being all over for him. But, I want to unpack this just a little bit before we move forward. So there's footage out there that was public of him falling from Camelback and people saw this. That is intense. And my second question or kind of add on to this is I can completely understand why you would want to know all that information and I guess I would want to know what's the reasoning for his friend not sharing. So it's kind of a two-part question for you to unpack before we move forward. But wow, that's intense. And I connect with you on the level of people knowing about this on a large scale, but I don't connect with you on the level of people seeing this, him visually. So that is so much. So if we can just unpack those two, wow, that's a lot. So kind of walk me through both of those questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So his friend was 21. He was younger than him. He was younger than me. I don't really know. It was right after. He didn't want to share the details of really what happened. I really only what I read on the news article, because my mom, when it came to the police and everything, she has already taken the lead on that. But he had already fallen, and his friend, though, got down to him and he was holding him, and my brother was still very much alive. You could just tell he was in agony, though, at the same time. And they posted that probably, after an hour, they knew. My brother, or me, and my mom and dad knew that he had passed. Then they posted that on the news for everyone to see. We didn't have time to tell anybody before then. Some of my friends, that's where they saw it first. And it's very traumatizing. And I wish I never saw that footage. I really, really do, because it's forever ingrained in me. My dad and my mom never saw it. I sheltered my dad from it. Other people sheltered my mom. They never saw that. And I'm glad they didn't. But I can still, it's very vivid.
Yeah, of course that is. My gosh, of course that's ingrained in you. I know my own experience. And so I connect very much with that. Like, that's the quote unquote last image you have of your brother. And it's also a very public image of your brother. So that's very, very difficult. How did you deal with the fact that his friend never wanted to really tell those like details of like what happened? Because for me personally, that's something that I struggled with for years, and I'm in a different place now with it, right? With my brother and going through murder, homicide, and I wanted to know, I had to know. And so I think we connect probably on that level. But how did you get to that place? Because you're a little bit further along in your grief journey than I am, and probably a lot of you guys listening, and we're all over the place with our grief journey. But, I wanted to know so bad, like what happened in those moments before. I was obsessed, and I'm sure you can relate to that. So was there ever a conversation with his friend, or like, how did you finally kind of release that or move forward? Like, I think that that's probably a question we all have listening to this story, because that's intense.
Mm-hmm. I know. I was angry because that's my brother. You were with him. You let go of his hand. And in my head, I was thinking he probably let go of his hand because he was going to fall too. And then it was just a lot of bitterness where I thought, why couldn't it have been you? Why couldn't have you been the one? And that was very early on. And I was really mean to him. I had conversations with him leading up to the funeral. I told him he's not allowed to come. He ended up calling my mom, and she said it was fine for him to go. At the funeral, he was upset and crying, and he told me, he's like, I don't want to, fight or argue or anything about this, but I can't go down that. And then he just quickly left. It really wasn't, we never had a full conversation, never. And it took me a long time to accept that wasn't going to happen. But where I'm at now, I'm glad it never did. But at that time, I could only yell and scream as much as I could. He couldn't force it out of him, but it just really, it was hard. And so with that, since I couldn't get answers from him, and I didn't want to be this crazy person lashing at him at the funeral, I later on reached out to the fire department near that would have been the crew that rescued him that day, because I was going to ask them for the details of what happened. But I scheduled that, and then I never went, because at that moment I thought, I don't want to know now. I've seen enough on the news. I did do more digging though, and heard the 911 call his friend made. So I heard my brother in the background. I heard him in pain. I heard him say his last words that I was wondering which were "help me." He was still very much there.
That's a lot to unpack, That's a lot to unpack there. So I guess my question for you next is, what do you think? It sounds like hearing that call and kind of getting little, everybody says closure. Like we'll talk about that in a couple minutes, but like, I don't really believe in closure. I believe in like the power of us being able to move forward, not move on. I think we all know my motto on this now, but what do you think compelled you to be like, okay, I don't need to go meet with the fire department. I don't need to see anything else. It sounds like that, hearing his last couple words or what he was saying on that call, but was that the turning point for you in being like, okay, like I'm going to move on, or this is okay, but like, this is maybe that shifting point for me. What was that for you? Are we there? Is that what it was? Or kind of talk us through that.
It was more, it came to a point of, I didn't want to know. I mean, I did want to know. I think it came to the point of, even if I do know, at the end of it, he's still gone. So why does it matter? I know he fell 50 feet. I know his death certificate was blunt force trauma. So he had a lot of injuries. I don't know the details of his injuries. And that's where I got to the point of obsessing so much about it. And then finally coming to the point, well, what does it matter? He's still gone, whether I know or not. And like you said, closure, especially with sudden death like that, there isn't closure because you're trying to make sense of it and you can't. It's something you can't make sense of. So you're not going to get that closure that you're trying to get. Your life is just forever changed.
Yeah, I absolutely love your answer to this and how you kind of went through this process, Chelsey. Like, it's traumatic what you went through. It's traumatic what your brother went through. I can't even imagine hearing that through the phone, even though I have my own trauma experience. It's like my heart just like, I'm with you. I'm so connected to you right now with this. But, I was in a group the other day, and people who had just newly lost siblings, they were like, I need my closure, because we're so programmed to get our closure. It's not closure. It's, what do you need as an individual to be able to process what has happened and move forward in the way that works for you? And I think that's what you're saying so eloquently here in this situation. And when we lose someone suddenly, traumatically, like you lost Clint, you got to navigate it in the way that works for you. And I think that's what you've done.
Everyone has their different kind of family dynamic and with loss, and even a great family, very close family, it's still going to split you up in some ways because we don't grieve the same. There's different relationships. With my mom, she was very particular in what she wanted. Me, I wanted this whole shrine, photos everywhere of him. And my dad, it was very similar how he and I grieved, except he had that addiction piece of it. That was really tough. But he was very involved with AA throughout his whole life. And that was his outlook. That is where he got his support. I then learned I need support. I started looking up books for sibling loss and found them. And I read all 7 of them out there because that's when I realized where's all this support? Yeah. And I'm just finding things for parents, and people are telling me you have to be strong for your parents. I know so many, we can relate to that, but I understand losing a child. I can't imagine that because your child is supposed to outlive you, but we are supposed to outlive our parents, my brother and I. That's siblings. But he died before that. So with my dad and his grief and how he dealt with it, my mom didn't. She did not go to therapy. She didn't do anything. She just kind of stuffed it down. And I was seeing a therapist when he had passed. So when I went to her and shared what happened, what she said to me was, well, it could have been worse. You could have lost a child. And that was just weeks after he passed. And that's when I realized just how...
Wait. Hold up. That was your therapist that said that to you? Mm-hmm. And this is a therapist that you have been seeing for a significant amount of time?
Yes, but prior to my brother passing. So my next session with her, I was a mess. I was said, this is what happened. and shared a lot of what happened, what I had that story at that time. And that was her response, was it could have been worse. You could have lost your child. I don't know if she's lost a child, if I don't know why, but that sticks with me. That was back in 2011, and I can still remember that. And I was in shock, so I didn't really say anything, but I wish I could go back now, because I would definitely say something. And it made me just realize she minimized my loss. She compared it, well, it could have been worse. How does that help me? Because my brother's gone. How does that help me? Thinking, oh, okay, I could have lost a child. Thank God I only lost my brother. That's not the mindset that you have. We've all known, with siblings, they're the ones who know what it's like to grow up in your family. And we finally became, he was 25 and I was 23. We just got to the point of being friends after fighting most of our lives. And then he was gone.
And that's very typical, Chelsey. That's why I think your story, everybody's story is important in sibling loss, because we need to bring so much more light to this. But this is something that is so interesting about your story, because you guys were at that point in time. And it's good for parents to hear too, because you were at a point in time when you kind of reconnect, right? Like when you're siblings and there was the two of you, so it's another dynamic as well, but they're your first best friend. They're your first person that you have fights with. They're the first person that you love, you hate, you go through everything. You see everything together. There's a bond that no one else can relate to. And diminishing the grief that happens when you lose that person, they're your first best friend, fight, all those things, that we're going to name. But I always talk about comparing grief, and it's a topic I talk about all the time. On social media, everywhere, on these podcasts, because my heart literally broke as you just told me that your therapist literally told you that, well, at least you didn't lose a child. You're 23 years old. You lost your first best friend, your first enemy, your first sleepover partner, your first person that you shared toys with, the person you went through high school with, all these things, right? And you had a similar experience with parents. So it really revs me up when I hear those things, and also breaks my heart, because I relate to you so much in that, because it's diminished. Our grief is definitely diminished, and that's why our mission is so important. But I think it's really important that psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists are aware of this loss, because you said it very well. We expect to lose our parents. We expect that at some point we will lose our sibling, but we don't expect to lose them at the ages that we lost our siblings and in the ways that we lost our siblings. And there's no education on that or preparation on that. However, exactly what your therapist said, we're told the worst thing that can ever happen to you is that you lose your child. So you are then reinforced with that information in therapy. And that is difficult, because how are you supposed to find solace or healing in that conversation? And I know we're going to talk a little bit more, and I want you to continue your story, because I know you've done therapy and had this great journey afterwards, and continue on your grief journey in a positive way. But that would have set me back. Whoa.
That's when I started to learn the forgotten mourners, and people telling me I need to be strong for my parents. And it was hard. It was a harsh realization. And it was just so, I didn't understand it. All that you said, that they know us more than anyone, our siblings. And it did take, a lot of us go into this adulthood, especially, and I really feel for those who did, lose siblings around our age or as teens, and you have that guilt, and it's sibling rivalry that you guys have. And that's what it was. But you have so much guilt now that they've gone and that they've left. And you're like, gosh, I wish I would have been nicer to them. Why did I have to act like this? But we are meant to grow old with our siblings. At least that's how it should be. So when we go carry into adulthood, those memories, those fights, it starts to soften as we become friends and mature. We had just gotten there. We had just became friends. And then that's when he passed. And the fact that he passed a week before my college graduation is just so crazy. And a week before, or not, probably a week prior than that, that's when my mom was telling me he can't come. And then all of a sudden he dies. And I can't be in her life anymore. She doesn't want anything to do with me. My dad, trying to do the best I can with him, but I'm also sleeping on a couch, trying to work a minimum wage job just to eat and also try and grieve my brother. But I thought I need to get this out. And so I started searching everywhere for grief groups because none of my friends got it. So I thought I need to be around someone who gets it. I don't care if they're, a stranger. There's comfort among strangers who get it. So I found the Hospice of the Valley grief support group. That's all I could find. But they welcomed me with open arms. Everyone went there was about at least 20 years older than me. They'd lost a parent or a spouse. I was definitely the youngest one there, but I still felt comfort being there. As time went on, though, I thought I need something more than this. So, and I went to the Hospice of the Valley group because there wasn't a sibling loss group. And that shocked me because I thought there's all these other groups. How is there not a sibling loss group? So I started doing more and more research. And that's when I came across the Compassionate Friends, the nonprofit organization for child loss, but it also, anyone can come, it could be cousins, it could be grandparents, siblings.
Yeah, it's much more inclusive. Yeah.
So I reached out to the chapter leader at the time for the Compassionate Friends here. And I asked her, I said, hey, I shared about my story. I want to build kind of the sibling loss subgroup under what you already have established here. Can I do that? And she said, yes. And that was back in, I think it was in 2012. It was very early on. And she is like a mom to me now. She's so much like just this maternal, loving person. I am so blessed to know her. But I led this sibling loss group for 3 years. I facilitated it. And I never told anybody what to do, what to say. I just said, hey, we're here to speak from experience. If there's something that someone says that resonates with you or that you think would be helpful, then share how you've worked through it. And versus, instead of saying this is what you should do, it's more just speaking from what we're doing right now. And it was really great to see, siblings more and more come. Of course, we never want that at the same time. We wish we don't want anyone a part of this club we never asked to join. But it was an outlet for them. It just felt, we would have the child loss group set up. And before we broke off into groups, that's when the siblings had their own room. And gosh, they just loved it so much as I came, because before some of them were going, but they were with their parents. Now they're just with siblings. So now they can really share deeply. And a lot of it is about their parents and the family dynamic. And they are now on the back burner, or they're neglected. So it was a really good outlet to have that for 3 years that I did that, until eventually it got to the point where I needed to move on in other areas. It was a lot of fresh loss that was happening, that was coming in. It was triggering in some ways, but I also wanted to pass the torch on to somebody else. And to this day, it still ran the sibling loss group here in Arizona. And it's the only sibling loss group in Arizona, which is still shocking to this day.
Yeah, but that's amazing that you were able to cultivate that. The Compassionate Friends is a great group. And I mean, I was just there this week in the sibling group here in Atlanta. I don't know if I told you that, Chelsey, and it's great, but it blows my mind too that is the only in-person group that I've been able to find here in Atlanta. And so interesting that is something that you birthed out of the Compassionate Friends in your local area in Arizona as well. I mean, there's millions of us out here. And like you said so eloquently, we don't wish this on anyone. We don't want anyone to join the club. But if you're in the club no one wants to join, as we say, right? You should be able to go be in the club, and there's nowhere to go be a part of the club. So I love that you did that. I want to thank you for that. I'm sure everybody in your community thanks you as well, as it continues to grow. And we don't want it to grow, like you said, but that's an amazing thing that you did. And I don't know that everybody is strong enough at that point in their loss journey to do that. So I really commend you for that. I think that's amazing. But I know that you, on your grief journey, had some other significant losses. I find it can be triggering to have other losses as well. And a part of your journey was that, right?
Yes. So I've lost my dad in 2017. We found out that he had stage 4 lung cancer. He was a smoker most of his life. He had quit, though, 2 years prior. I was told he had 4 to 6 months. I knew this day would come that I would have to take care of, my parents. I didn't know that I would be now 29 and he'd be 61. And it was so sudden, so fast. This time, though, I thought, okay, 4 to 6 months. Well, then let me look at it differently. I get the gift of time now. And as devastating as it was, I said, no, I need to cherish what I have now. I have the gift of time. We have at least 4 months. But he just kind of gave up. And I did all that I could to take care of him. And with hospice, I was the one physically taking care of him, which was incredibly difficult. I needed Clint more than anything in that moment. But my dad passed away 3 weeks from his diagnosis. And that just kind of really changed me even more, because he and I grew so close after my brother passed. My dad and I grew more close than ever. And my mom and I grew more and more further apart. So now I lost my brother and my dad, who were both my protectors, who would have never, ever abandoned me. They didn't leave by choice, but my mom did. And that was really hard. I feel as if I've been in this survival mode for so long, but I like that it's come more. My therapist helped me realize now you're past survivor mode. You've done more than just survive. You're a fighter. That's more your brand new identity. Not survivor anymore, victim or anything like that. It's a fighter and a creator. And that's what I do. If something doesn't exist, I create it. And I didn't become that until my brother passed. And that's when I created the sibling loss group. And to kind of go back towards what I've done to honor him. And I know so many other siblings I've heard out there where their stories and what they've done are created foundations and given scholarships and have done so much to have it where their siblings' loss is not in vain. I reached out to the news since they had all this footage of my brother, and they were getting some of the story wrong, minor things like his age. And I was really upset about that early on. You're going to report on my brother. I didn't give you permission. Now you have his age wrong. And I went to the news station just 2 months after he died. Like I said, that was when I was living on a friend's couch. It was a fog to me. And I shared his story, and they played the footage. And I know I wanted to share the story to get it right, but I knew at that moment that there was something more that I wanted to do. It wasn't just to memorialize him. There was something more, but I had no idea what that looked like. I knew it was going to be something, but it hadn't come to me yet. But that was 2 months after he passed, where I kind of thought, okay, how can I fix this in the future? And so, because losing Clint and the manner, his death was so preventative. And I never tried to ever make his death seem, where it was out of his control. He made a mistake. He made a huge mistake. It cost him his life. I will never say, oh, he did everything right and this still happened. No, he did everything wrong. And so many of us, especially in in our 20s, we're fearless. We're reckless sometimes. And he thought he was invincible. And a lot of us have thought that before in many areas. And it cost him his life, though, unfortunately. And that was really hard. The fact that this was so preventable. And I don't want another family to go through this, but how do I do that? It took me some time to really decide what am I going to do? What does that look like? I had to evolve and slowly started changing that we don't really have much signage out there for safety. We don't even have much education anywhere on safe hiking awareness. And you would think it's obvious to not hike when it's 110 degrees here, but people from all over come here and they say it's Arizona, it's a dry heat. 110 though is 110. You should not be hiking. At first it was more, okay, here's safety with mountain climbing. Then it turned more into the heat. And then it just overall was just hiking awareness in general and just being safe and making sure you come home safe to your family. So I started doing more media interviews. Then I thought, okay, this is what I want. I want to share his story of what not to do and also provide the education of here's how you can stay safe. So I started partnering with the fire department here, with the city officials, with Parks and Recreation for the city of Phoenix. We'd get together, we'd have these meetings. it was really hard for me because we would talk about other deaths that occurred on Camelback Mountain in detail and some of my brothers. So I had to really get emotionally strong because I wanted to be taken seriously. I couldn't be a sobbing mess in these media interviews or these, in-person meetings with the city officials. I had to really do what I can, and in the sense where I could be taken seriously. That doesn't mean though after each meeting, the second I got in my car, I lost it every time. But while I was there in the meetings, I did what, just a brainstorm of.
Yeah. I can't imagine, like, I relate to this part as well. Obviously, I lost my brother in a totally different way, but I understand like having to go into a situation. I remember talking to the detectives. I remember going in to get, autopsy, going to the hospital to get records, like all these things go into it. My girlfriend who was an attorney, all these things to like get to like the part of the mission that I was trying to, I don't know where I am now, right? What I'm doing now, telling other people's stories, but also trying to really get to the core of what happened to my brother. But I totally relate to what you're saying, Chelsey, because I realized like I have to like put this somewhere. I have to put this emotion somewhere. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to go home and bawl or, maybe have a glass of wine or two or so, afterwards, or like go talk to one of my best friends or whatever, right? It was deeply emotional. I specifically remember leaving the hospital after getting every single record of what went on with my brother after being murdered and being in there, and it's all there. And I was completely traumatized. And so I really empathize with you and just also commend you for being able to go in front of those people, because again, in front of detectives, PIs, things like that I was in front of too, you've got a cause, you've got a mission, and like you're trying to help not only your brother and remember your brother, but you don't want this to happen to anybody else. And although our brothers pass in different ways, I completely understand what you mean by going in there, and it's compartmentalizing essentially. And that's not an easy thing to do when you're grieving. Not easy at all.
Yeah. And if you keep it like that, then it's definitely going to come up eventually in other areas. But I would save all kind of my crying, all of that when I was away from everybody. But it was only a lot of what my friends saw or the public saw with these media interviews was me just fighting to share his story. But really at the end of these media interviews, some of them would last all morning and most of them would be live. I would just melt down after when nobody else was around. But I kept at it because I was getting somewhere. I was starting to make some movement. I couldn't give up. And that's just really what fueled me. So I finally shared more about, okay, let's do this safety sign. Let's put it up, 3/4 of a mile up the trail. Camelback is a mile long, but it's a mile straight up. And 3/4 of a mile up is where people will tend, and right going just there, it's a hard hike. And that's when people tend to rest, take pictures. It's already from that area, very beautiful. Then they decide if they want to go further on their hike. That's where I wanted the sign, not at the base of the trail, because a lot of people don't read those. They just start hiking. But the city of Phoenix told me that's against policy. We cannot have a story and of someone who passed. We can't have a photo of like that on on a mountain. We can't have any kind of memorial. And I said, it's not a memorial. It's a safety sign. And that's when that started to develop, that I was speaking out just for that safety piece of it. It wasn't a memorial sign. I was trying to use this sign of what not to do essentially, but also have that awareness. But the city of Phoenix, I fought and I fought and I fought. And there were times when they didn't answer me. And so I then would go to the news.
Yeah.
Every single time they would answer me, I just reach out to my media contacts and say, hey, I'm not getting a response on this. So can we do something? Say, yes, so I'm trying to work on this, but unfortunately I'm not hearing back from so-and-so. Then they would call me after that. But they later would say, we thought you were just this emotional family member. Like they've seen the past so many times. They said, we thought you would just go away eventually, but you didn't. You kept coming back. So I really pitched it to them that people, they're going to do a double take. You're on a mountain in the middle of your trail. You see a young man on a sign. That's going to make you look back. And I said, people are going to do a double take. They're going to see, decide then whether or not they're going to continue on with their hike. Then they finally installed it. They knew if I didn't, because I would just keep fighting. There was no way I was going to, I was going to see that through then. And I did that 3 years straight working with them.
Yeah, I love that about you. I love that.
That fire and that passion, it just fueled me more and more, not just because it was in memory and honor of him and working through a lot of my grief, but to know that I could potentially have it save someone's life in a sense with this. I could have it where a family doesn't have to go through this horrible pain and all of that. I have that power to try and do that. And up to 1 million people visit Camelback a year. So it was going to capture a lot of audiences. The city of Phoenix finally approved it. There was a huge press release for it, and the sign was officially installed. And surprisingly, and why I share this, because maybe others may be able to resonate, I did all of this hard work. I worked so hard, and my friends were so proud of me when it was in. And that's when I finally broke down, though. And I went to my therapist. I said, what is going on? I look at me. I've done all these interviews. I've done all of this. Why am I not able to get out of bed? And she said, it's part of how you work through your grief. And you probably just had this irrational thinking, okay, if I do this and I do this and I get this done, he'll come back to me. Then it was all done. And you realize he's not coming back to you. So that was another layer that I'm like, oh gosh, I have to keep working through this.
Yeah. I just want to congratulate you about this sign. That's incredible. Like that's a huge, huge thing that you have done, Chelsey. That's huge. But I want to just unpack before we, continue and kind of wrap a little bit, but so much here. Like I relate so much to like your tenacity and wanting to solve and like create, like prevention. I get it. Like I totally understand it. And you said something about your story that again, I connect with so deeply. When I was going through my journey and when I finally got enough answers, right? Where I was like, okay, I know what happened to my brother and this is where we are. And this is what I can do. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop fighting because I'm still in the fight. It never stops. But it felt like I could take a breath. I was bedridden. I don't even know if I shared this much in my first season, but like I was exhausted. So I'm going to go a little deeper with you, but like I literally was like in bed. I was exhausted. I remember getting the answers from the other detective, who I call the good guy, in my show and the season. And I was exhausted. I like went to bed and like just kind of like laid there and I was so tired and I felt this whole other mix of emotions because I was so determined. I relate to you on that. Oh, I relate to you so much. I'm still determined, but like I had enough answers that I was able to like, I don't know if I believe in the at peace thing. I'm not really into that, but I respect people that feel at peace. But I was able to be like, okay, this is what happened. Like someone of like authority and law enforcement, which is why I think I'm connecting with you on this part of the story, has recognized this is really screwed up. This is terrible what happened. This should have happened this way. And I'm going to help you in any way possible. My body like was loose a little bit. And I was mentally a little bit looser and my heart was still in pain, but a little like it was a shift, but I was exhausted. So I connect with you so much on this part of your story because it was a fight. It was a fight and you were in the fight of it too, Chelsey. And so although we lost our brothers in totally different ways, like I really, really get what you're talking about because the exhaustion set in and a different form of grief set in. And I really, truly think that's when depression set in for me because I was angry for so long. I was angry. I was going for and it served me in a sense. Like I was able to like fight, like jab. And then I was like, okay, I'm exhausted now. Like, oh, like it was a lot. And so it took me like another year or so until I told my full story here and I became a little proactive again on, about the cause, about the mission and my brother. But I really connect with you on that, but I do want to ask you another question about this. So you were seeing one therapist who we talked about earlier had diminished your grief. Did you seek out a different therapist? Tell us a little bit about that story before we wrap, because I really want all of our surviving siblings to hear about that, because it sounds like therapy was integral in your grief journey, because it has been for mine. So I want you to share that as well, of course.
So I didn't see that therapist ever again after that last session for sure. And the sibling loss group was very therapeutic for me. So was a sign, but I'm just a strong believer in therapy. And I know it's not for everybody, but I do believe there's outlets that we need, whether it's in a group setting or one-on-one. We can't stuff it down. It's going to come back no matter what we do. And I still was going to therapy through all of this and working through this. And it took me probably just recently to really understand more about my loss in the last decade, and just getting this sign up there, which I sit by and I see people do a double take. I see people stop and look at it and say to each other, you know what, we don't have enough water. Let's turn back around. But you're never going to see that on the news. You're never going to see what deaths or injuries or whatnot were prevent it. But I had several therapists over the years, and great therapists, but what kept happening was either one was moving out of their practice or out of state. And I stuck with therapy though, on and off. I was in therapy. My dad was still, when he was alive, he was with his AA meetings. My mom never went to therapy. She kind of just stuffed it down. But just as far as this, just stressing the importance of therapy and why that's something we need to look into. I do want, if we have time, to touch on my car accident that I experienced in 21. And the reason for that is to share that I did this sibling loss group, and I'm so grateful it still runs today. And I look back now and I am proud of myself for that and for his sign, because I think it was hard for me to get compliments and things like that for it, because to me, it was just, I had to do it. I didn't have a choice is what I felt like. But I was in this car accident in 2021 and broke my back and had to learn to walk again. This time, I'm the one in the hospital. I'm the one that's, vulnerable, that needs to be taken care of, that can't even walk yet. And my mom, on and off, we were very rocky. I went to recover at her house, and 3 weeks in, she said she'd rather have my brother here than me. And that was April 2021. I have not spoken to her since, but that accident restarted my grief in a way. It felt like my brother and my dad, like they had just died yesterday. And I couldn't understand why. And it took me a while to my therapist, a wonderful therapist that I have, talk me through it and just said, it's trauma, where there's grief, there's usually trauma, and trauma and grief echo. So something else would completely bring it up. This car accident, the fact that it brought up so much, just the grief, it was so heavy and I couldn't understand it. But I worked through it with a therapist and everything like that to really get through it. And it was something to really understand that, I guess, going back to the closure part, I think that's what it was. I was trying to get some kind of closure, whether it was with the accident, with my mom. I was never going to get it, but I obsessed so much about it. And luckily, I worked through a lot of it and realized my mom, it's not a me problem. A lot of the things that have happened, it's not that I've caused that or I've caused that relationship.
Yeah, I get it. No, I totally understand. So I want to unpack a lot of what you just said, because I think there's a lot here. So for myself, I think you already know, as a lot of you guys listening know, that my relationship with my mother has been challenged as well. And so Chelsey, you and I connect deeply on that level too, because my mother has definitely not processed the loss of my brother. In my opinion, telling people that you're at peace with the loss of your son being murdered and it's not even been a year doesn't mean you've processed the death, right? And so I struggled with this too. My relationship with her has struggled. It's non-existent at this point in time. But you've beautifully put, it doesn't mean I don't love her. I love her deeply. She's my mother, but it's not there. It's not there. And it's just listening to your story, Chelsey, I relate so much to the dynamic of, losing Clint and your mom not having this like close relationship with him, but then wanting to swoop in and control everything, because that's exactly what happened in my own scenario with my loss of my brother, our loss as a family. And I've had my issues with my father as well, and I'm so sorry, like my heart goes out to you. I'm so sorry for the loss, because your story is a multi-loss story again. And we've had a lot of requests on this show to talk about that and dealing with it's compounding loss, as our therapist will tell us, right? And I had that. I actually lost 3 people in a row, which is a whole other episode. But, this brought me and my father closer, as I've shared. So I connect so much with you on that, because I wasn't close with my father my whole life, and he was absent for a lot of my life and in and out. And it's a very complicated relationship. So I connect very deeply with you on that. And I had a car accident. So I'm like, I get you. Like, I totally am following you on this, but traumas definitely do bring all of your other traumas back up in ways that you wouldn't even imagine, in ways that you're like, wow, I didn't think I'd behave this way or act this way, or like, I don't know, but I just couldn't move forward or close out our conversation without identifying these similarities. And I think it's really the beauty of the sharing of the sibling loss in our journeys, is that we have more in common than we realize. And some of the deepest relationships that I have found over the past couple years with people who have lost siblings, I'm like, God, we have so much in common because of these family dynamics. And even when they've had, like, I've had a lot of people on other episodes that have had a quote unquote positive experience, but it jumbles up a family. There's always things that happen. And now for you, Chelsey, you're an only child. Like, that changes the family dynamic completely. And you've also lost your father. So I just think it's relatable to all of us as surviving siblings, that the family dynamic changes completely. And we also go through other traumas as we continue to get older, because we lose our grandparents, our parents, different things happen, and that will bring things back up to the surface. So yeah, thanks for sharing that and being very vulnerable with us, but also sharing about therapy, because, I don't know if I'd be here without my therapist. And I definitely would not have stuck with my therapist who told me, like, at least you didn't like lose a child. So I commend you for like starting that group and seeking out the right therapist for you in that connection. I think that's so important. It can be hard, because I call like finding your therapist a little bit like dating. You got to find the right person for you, because you got to have a connection. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
You definitely want to make sure they have those specialties such as grief and loss. You want to make sure they are someone where it's supposed to feel like a safe place. It's supposed to feel that you can tell them anything here. You can just share more than what you would share with your friends and other loved ones, and having that space and getting those feelings validated. I mean, I was traumatized from that first therapist, and I didn't want to get any of my loss or anything like that minimized. But after my accident, where I got a new therapist, gosh, I had so much PTSD. She walked me through so much of that. And eventually she got to the point where she said, you don't even talk about your accident anymore. What you talk about is your mom and what happened with the accident. So she said, that's now where I think the real trauma lies. And so we were working on getting through that. And why the car accident just really knocked me down was that abandonment from my mom again. And the fact that my brother and my dad weren't here. And they were the 2 people who would have never abandoned me, never. So I had to go through this whole accident. I had friends, but it's hard. I didn't have any other family. So, and it's what I've kind of noticed, and I don't know kind of what those you've talked to regarding as far as loss for men, they grieve so much more differently. They have their, it's hard for them to go to therapy.
Oh my God, I totally agree. Totally agree. Yes, they grieve differently. Guys listening, you grieve differently, which is why we have at least a guy on every season, because it's a different perspective. And I think I know where you're going with this, Chelsey. Like, in group earlier this week, there was, a young man there. Obviously, everything is anonymous, so I'm not sharing details, but we talked about this, how culturally men are supposed to like suck it up. Therapy means you're weak and you don't do this. But when they actually engage and do it, oh my God, it's a game changer. So yes, I agree with you 150%. Men grieve differently, but I also think it's because of the cultural stigmas that are put on them.
Exactly. And I feel for them. I've seen just men over the years in their grief, and especially in my, groups and everything that I facilitated. So that's why I just urge them to seek out therapy as well. And it's the same like dating, just, who to look for, what's going to be the best fit and where you feel vulnerable, but you have to also be open to sharing those feelings. And therapists can help guide you, but they can't help speak for you with your loss. You're going to have to still share what you can about it. And it's hard. It's so hard to open up. And I'm someone who, like you, I'm very, very open with my grief and my loss because I've dealt with a lot of loss over the years that I don't know who I would be today without it. I have no idea where it would be. But I found so many different outlets and so many different ways to get through it. And look at me now, it's year 12, entering in without him. But I moved forward, but I carry them all with me. Those that I've lost entering into 2023. I said, all right, you guys, my grief is going to be carried. I'm going to think of you guys millions and millions of times this year. And that's just how it is. I think, there's the stages of grief, but the acceptance part, I'll never accept how he died and how young he died. He deserved a lifetime, but I will accept that I'm going to miss him for the rest of my life. And I know usually towards the end, kind of share with what advice or what we would share with other siblings. And that's why I was going to kind of segue into it and just say, you won't ever get over it.
Chelsey, I love you. You already know where I'm going with this. I love it. I love it. Yes, go for it. What are you going to share with our amazing surviving sibling audience? Yeah, I love it. You already know the show. I love it.
I love your show, and I just love how it's just growing and expanding. And now you have all these people who want to share their story, and I really hope my story, and I know other stories that you had people shared, I definitely resonate with. Even, definitely with yours, your whole beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, yes. And even though there's not answers, sometimes there's comfort just knowing you're not alone or that someone experienced something similar to you. So I tell people, you're not going to get over it. Life is going to be different. You won't be the same person anymore because you don't even have that same life anymore. But one day you'll realize that the tears, the screaming sobs in the pillow, crying in our shower, our car, the bathroom at work, you'll realize that this pain is so deep because of the love you have for your sibling. So you grieve hard because you love hard. Through all of this, I've learned that love lasts longer than life. And just realizing all this, and I still have my days crying and all of that, but that's love. And I think, gosh, that's so much love I have, to give. I love someone that much that it has this void in my life. And that's some of what I've learned along the way of you're never going to be the same. So it's hard, and everyone's journey is different.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. It is hard. I'm like getting emotional listening to you say that, but like, I don't even know how to follow that, Chelsey. That was so beautiful. And I can tell you're a facilitator of groups because I just speak so eloquently about this, but you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. And I think it's really intimidating for those of us who are really early in our grief journey. And when I say early, everyone's different, right? It can be the first day, it can be the first year. Some people, it's the first 10 years. And that scares people sometimes. But no, everyone's on their own grief journey, right? We have our own timeline. You are not on this. I hear that a lot, and I'm sure you've heard that in the groups that you facilitated. I hear that a lot as I interview and go to groups and I speak. I have to be at this phase or this, part of grieving, or I'm supposed to be in anger right now or depression or this hurry up and do this. So what you said is so beautiful and true, Chelsey, because we're on a journey. It's a journey for life. This sibling, brother, sister, or if you're in multi-loss, our hearts really go out to you, but they were a part of your physical life. They're going to be a part of the rest of your life. And it's not about moving on. It's not about forgetting them.
Mm-hmm.
It's about honoring them, remembering them, and learning how to move forward in this new life that you have. And I think that you said it. So, mic drop. I don't even know how to comment beyond that. Chelsey, I love what you said, because it's so accurate. You're different and it's scary at first, but the person that you continue to grow into is honoring the person, the sibling or siblings that you've lost. And it's okay. And giving yourself permission to be that person is okay. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing. And it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be, here's the other tough part. It's okay to be happy again. It's okay to feel fulfilled again. But it's a lot to unpack. And I love that you already knew what to say at the end of the episode. I love that, because I think it's important that everybody gives their advice, right? Because we all have different walks of life and different experiences. So thank you so much for that. Chelsey, I just also want to thank you for the fight that you gave for Clint, but also for everyone. I know Camelback Mountain so well. So, oh my gosh, I had no idea how dangerous it is. And this is something that some people might be like, oh, it's a sign. This is much bigger than people realize. And we make these quote unquote small gestures to change. It changes lives, because I think it's so important that we hear the stories behind the change and the fight behind it, because people don't know. People don't always realize. So again, I want to commend you on fighting for that, because your life has been changed forever. And here you are over a decade later telling the story. And I appreciate that. Chelsey, I know you're in our Facebook group, but where else can people connect with you if they're local to you, or if they've gone through a similar experience and they want to help fight the fight? Because this is incredible what you've done. How can they connect with you?
I can give my email address, or they can send me a request on Facebook or a message. I'll get actually some messages from there. And there's more things I want to do with this line. There's more plans that I have. I'm not done. I'm wanting to work on this kind of TikTok to just share how beautiful it is, and also how dangerous, in hopes that it goes outside of Arizona. So
yeah, absolutely. So we'll tag you. We'll tag your Facebook, your TikTok, anything that you want to connect. And you're absolutely right. It's not just Camelback Mountain. Like, this is a thing in so many places where people climb mountains. Like, we need to be aware of the precautions that need to happen, and in honor of Clint. So Chelsey, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing your story. This has been amazing. It's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm just really excited to hear this season that you have. Congrats to a third season, and it's just growing and growing. And the more you get people on there, the more others relate to it. I looked up, when I started listening to podcasts, siblings. Yours was the first one that popped up. And hearing your story and just really resonated with me. And as I've shared with how my brother and his friend, and how I'm glad I don't know the details now, but I still have that footage, that I saw. But I also wanted to add in, for those who have had that kind of traumatic loss in that sense, the way you and I have, I became so obsessed on how he died that I forgot how he lived. But it took me years to get there. So everyone just needs to kind of really give themselves grace. You can only do the best you can with what you have. And it's hard. You don't get prepared for this. There's not a class in school or anything like that. So what I share, though, with people now, since I am still involved with safe hiking awareness, is to just be aware of anywhere you go. I've gone undercover to resorts throughout the valley, especially around Camelback. I won't name them, but pretended I was a tourist to see what they were giving out education-wise for the concierge, and it wasn't good. They were saying flip-flops are fine to climb or hike Camelback, 1 bottle of water when it's 110 out. And there's that education piece. So if you're going to another state and there's this, all these tourist attractions where you want to go, like Multnomah Falls that I've heard in Oregon is actually a really hard hike, but it's such a tourist area. just do your research and your education. Make sure that you over prepare. That's fine to do that. And I can provide you to also the link to City of Phoenix, where we implement it in addition to the sign. It was a Take a Hike, Do It Right campaign that gives all the different safety things that needed and to be aware of when you're hiking.
Oh my God, Chelsey, I love that. Yes, we're definitely going to tag that in this episode and put it in the notes for everybody as a resource, because you're absolutely right. It's not just Camelback Mountain. This goes on everywhere. And I don't think people know, like, we don't know things until they happen, right? And that's also the point of this podcast. And you're so kind. Thank you. That's our mission. We want to bring hope to all of the surviving siblings out there, that people like you and I have remembered our brothers. We will forever remember our brothers, and we've done something about it, and we're going to continue to move forward, but we're never going to forget them. So all of this will be in the show notes. And Chelsey, you are awesome. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad I finally got in. I've been trying for a while. You're like a celebrity now.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.